The rhythmic thud of the frayed canvas punching bag was the only heartbeat in the stifling garage. It was a singular sound, a consistent drumbeat in a forgotten corner of Detroit. The air hung heavy with the smell of sweat, old rubber and mildew, dust motes dancing like ghosts in the single sunbeam that cut through a grimy window. Desmond D. Johnson, 21, wasn't a ghost, but he moved like one, a shadow weaving and slipping, his heavy, worn training gloves like extensions of his own tired will. The makeshift ropes, crafted from old garden hoses, groaned with every motion, a chorus to his silent, brutal effort. His lean, sinewy body, honed not by high-end equipment but by raw, determined labor, glistened under the garage's solitary, yellowed light bulb. Coach Marcus Preacher Evans, a man whose face was a roadmap of a lifetime of hard-won battles, watched on in silence, his voice a rasp that rarely interrupted the rhythm. "What are you fighting for, boy?" he would ask without moving his lips, and silence would always be the answer. Outside, the world was filled with a different kind of quiet. The neighborhood, abandoned years ago by the middle class who had fled to the suburbs, exuded a stillness of broken promises. The brick houses, some with shattered windows, stared out at the street like vacant eyes. Distant sirens, a familiar soundtrack, echoed the stories Desmond and Elias Ramirez, his friend and sparring partner, had seen and felt firsthand. Elias, tall and wiry, was the embodiment of the rage that a broken system could breed, a fury Desmond constantly struggled to keep contained. "It's a losing fight, D," Elias had commented once, his voice low with deep frustration. "It doesn't matter how strong you are, the game is rigged." Desmond wasn't sure if he was talking about boxing or their lives. Desmond's most powerful motivation, however, was his 16-year-old sister, Aisha. Her eyes, wide and intelligent, held a quiet innocence not yet crushed by the weight of their world. She was a silent witness to their mother's struggle, a woman who worked 2 jobs just to keep their family afloat. Desmond's fight was never just about winning. It was about being a beacon of hope in a world that stubbornly insisted they had no value. He fought to rewrite the story that had been written for him and his people, a fight as much psychological as it was physical. The punching bag absorbed his blows, a hollow sound against the humid air. He dodged a non-existent punch, his body moving with a trained grace, but his mind was on the quiet desperation of his mother's tired smile, the flicker of hope in his sister's eyes. He wasn't fighting an opponent in a ring. He was fighting the empty, gnawing feeling in his own gut, the knowledge that the system was always working against him. The garage was his sanctuary, a small, grimy world where he had some semblance of control. And in that control, he found a reason to keep going. The sweat dripped from his brow, a hot, salty burn in his eyes. But he kept his gaze fixed on the bag. It wasn't just a piece of old canvas. It was a physical manifestation of every silent obstacle, and he would keep hitting it until it was nothing but an echo of a struggle already won.
The first fight in the local championship was a stark and brutal clash of realities. The opposing gym, a cathedral of sanitized athletic pursuit, was in a wealthy, manicured neighborhood. It smelled of new leather, industrial-grade floor cleaner, and a faint, sweet scent of victory. The ring was flawlessly lit, the ropes pristine and white, not a single scuff mark on the canvas. Desmond, in his frayed, sweat-stained gloves and worn-out training pants, felt like an interloper in a world he was not meant to inhabit. His opponent, a young white man with a glistening sponsorship and a corner crew of half a dozen professionals, seemed to be the physical embodiment of a system built for his success. He moved with a practiced ease, a product of a world where resources were not a question but a given. The crowd buzzed with a low, confident murmur, the kind of sound that fills a space where outcomes are rarely in doubt. The fight itself was a visceral battle of opposing forces. Desmond's raw, street-forged technique, born of instinct and desperation, was met by his opponent's brutal textbook power. Desmond dodged and weaved, a wolf on the asphalt, conserving energy, looking for an opening. The blows he took landed with a dull, heavy thud, a different sound than the clean, crisp punches his opponent delivered. In the third round, Desmond found his moment. He feinted left, drawing his opponent's guard, then drove a lightning-fast right hook that staggered the other fighter. The crowd gasped, a sharp intake of breath. The momentum had shifted. But as Desmond moved in to press his advantage, the referee, a man in a perfectly tailored shirt, stepped between them and called a questionable timeout, a soft, almost imperceptible signal to give the other fighter a moment to recover. Desmond's heart sunk, not from physical exhaustion, but from the searing, familiar pain of knowing the game was rigged. When the fight resumed, his opponent, now visibly steadied, landed a series of quick, brutal jabs. The referee, citing a non-existent technical fault, ended the match, declaring a victory for the home fighter. The crowd, which had been buzzing, exploded in a chorus of boos and jeers. Desmond's pain wasn't just from the punches he had taken. It was the pain of a system that would not let him win even when he had earned it. The humiliation was amplified by the blatant injustice. He had lost, and the loss was less about skill and more about a cruel, invisible set of rules that he could not break. On the ride home, the frustration curdled into a simmering rage. Elias, driving with a reckless intensity, was a mirror of Desmond's inner turmoil. "See," Elias said, his voice low and full of contempt, "I told you, it's a wasted time. There are other ways to get what you want, D. Faster ways." He was talking about the easy way out, the temptation of illicit money and power. The promise of quick, dirty cash was a palpable temptation, a solution to their financial struggles that Marcus's worn-out wisdom in boxing couldn't provide. Desmond looked out the window at the familiar, dilapidated landscape of his city. The streetlights cast long, broken shadows over crumbling facades and empty lots, a visual representation of his own broken dreams. He was tired of being at a disadvantage before the fight even began. Later that night, as Desmond walked home alone, the humid night air thick with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes, a police cruiser pulled up beside him. The silent blue and red lights painted the street in cold, menacing flashes. The officer, a beefy white man with a hardened face, shone a blinding flashlight in his eyes. "What are you doing out here?" the officer asked, his tone accusatory, as if Desmond didn't have the right to be on his own street. The question was a low blow, a final insult after the defeat. The humiliation from the fight was nothing compared to that feeling of being perpetually a suspect, of being seen not as a human being, but as a threat. Desmond kept his hands visible, his voice calm, but inside, a volcano was erupting. He thought of his mother's strained face, the quiet determination in his sister's eyes, and the sheer weight of their hope made him force the anger down. That suffocating sense of injustice, of a system that offered no place for him, was the fire that drove him back to Marcus's garage. He burst through the door, the bell jingling with a desperate urgency. He wrapped his hands, the familiar calluses of comfort, and started hitting the punching bag with a ferocity he hadn't felt before. He wasn't just training for a championship anymore. He was fighting for his dignity. He was fighting the system itself, one punch at a time. The pain was real, the sweat was real, and in that small, forgotten garage, his hunger for more than survival became a tangible, powerful force.
The eviction notice arrived like a gut punch. It was a single, crisp, white sheet of paper, an official seal pressed into the corner, a cold and clinical harbinger of doom. It felt alien in Marcus's calloused hands, a piece of a world that operated on a different set of rules than their own. The developer's name was clean and corporate, a faceless entity that had seen the old garage not as a sanctuary, but as a profitable piece of a revitalization project, a thinly veiled term for gentrification. The air in the gym, usually thick with the energy of a living thing, became heavy with a new kind of silence, the stillness of a place about to die. Marcus, the man who had weathered every storm, stood looking at it, his shoulders slumped, the lines on his face deepening with a weariness Desmond had never seen before. He was tired of fighting, tired of the system winning. His pain was the slow, agonizing recognition of a defeat that wasn't his own, but one he had seen his entire community face countless times. He was a veteran of this war, and his surrender was the most painful part of the battle. Desmond looked at the notice, then at Marcus, and a silent fury began to simmer within him. The garage wasn't just a place to train, it was a last bastion of endogenous growth, a place where the community could build something for itself, by itself. It was a beacon against the tide of poverty and neglect. Losing it wasn't just losing a place to train, it was a profound act of erasure, a final, definitive statement that their efforts and their existence didn't matter. The eviction notice was the system made manifest, a tangible enemy with a name and an address. He felt the gnawing emptiness inside him, the vacant esteem that had haunted him for so long, now transforming into a hard, molten core of resolve. He would not let this happen. This was his fight, and it was a fight for more than just a title. It was for Marcus, for Aisha, for the tired smiles of his mother and the quiet dignity of his neighborhood. The championship wasn't the goal. It was the weapon. He would use it to save them all. Desmond's training transformed. The rhythmic thud of the punching bag became a drumbeat of vengeance, each blow a strike against the developer, the crooked referee, the indifferent police officer. The air in the garage grew thick with his sweat and the raw, unyielding force of his will. He ran the familiar streets of Detroit, his feet pounding the cracked asphalt like a silent, furious rhythm section. He moved through the ghostly quiet of the abandoned lots, the shattered windows of old factories, each one a testament to the system that had stripped his city of its soul. He pushed his body to the brink of collapse, the burning in his muscles a constant, searing reminder of the pain his people endured. He trained with a singular focus, his mind a steel trap, every moment, every breath, every drop of sweat dedicated to a single purpose, to win and to use that victory to save the only home he had ever known. The day of the fight arrived, thick with tension. The makeshift gym felt like a church. Neighbors, friends, and strangers from the community filled every available space. The air was thick not with the sterile smell of disinfectant, but with the raw sense of humanity. Stale beer, cigarette smoke, the humid breath of 100 bodies packed into a small space. The ropes of the ring, the old garden hoses, felt like lifelines. His opponent entered the ring, the same clean-cut, sponsored fighter who had defeated him before. His opponent's confidence was palpable, an arrogance born of a world that always handed him a win. Desmond's eyes were not on his opponent, but on Marcus, standing in his corner, his face a grim mask of hope. He looked at the crowd, at his sister Aisha, her small hand clutched to her chest. He was fighting for them. The bell rang, and the fight began with a deafening roar that quickly faded into a focused, visceral silence. The world shrank to the square of the ring, the sound of leather against skin, the grunts of exertion, the soft scuff of their shoes on the canvas. Desmond fought with a new kind of ferocity. He was not just a boxer, he was a conduit for a community's rage. He took punches, felt the sting of a well-placed jab, but the pain was a whisper compared to the fire inside him. He remembered the feeling of the police flashlight on his face, the smug look of the developer, the exhaustion in his mother's eyes. He used the propensity for anger and violence that the system had tried to instill in him, but he channeled it not into destruction, but into creation, a force for change. He moved with a brutal elegance, his body a weapon, his mind a clear, singular focus. The crowd's cheers rose and fell like a tide, but all he heard was the sound of his own heart, a drumbeat of defiance. In the final round, with a surge of energy that came from a well he didn't know he had, Desmond landed a clean, explosive right hook. The punch landed with a sickening crack, and his opponent's eyes went blank. He hit the canvas with a thud that echoed through the silence that followed. The crowd erupted. It was a roar of catharsis, of relief, of disbelief. Desmond stood over his opponent, his chest heaving, his body a symphony of pain and exhaustion, but a victory had been won. He looked at Marcus, and his mentor gave a slow, deliberate nod, a recognition that this was not just a win, but a statement. Desmond raised his gloves, not in a personal victory, but in a silent, collective tribute to the people who had given him the strength to fight. Somewhere in the crowd, a young man held up his phone, capturing the moment. He edited the raw footage, adding a powerful, soulful song, a slow-motion sequence of Desmond training in the dilapidated garage, then the full, visceral force of his final punch. The video, titled "The Silent Shout," was uploaded to the internet, and a community struggle became a world's inspiration. The notoriety came like a tidal wave, a sudden blinding light on a life that had only ever known shadow. The video, a 3-minute symphony of grit, determination, and a raw final blow, was everywhere. It was on news feeds, shared in group chats, and replayed on sports channels. Desmond's face, a roadmap of pain and triumph, was suddenly visible to millions. He went from being a ghost in a forgotten garage to the subject of 1,000 social media comments. The sudden shift felt surreal, a disorienting haze of phone notifications and whispered recognition. People who had once walked past him on the street now saw him. They didn't see the boy who trained alone. They saw a symbol. The quiet victory, the one he had won for himself and his community, was now a public commodity, a story to be packaged and sold. The first shark appeared in a glass-walled office downtown, a place that smelled of polished wood, leather, and unspoken promises. His name was Mr. Harrison, a marketing executive whose skin was so pale it seemed untouched by the sun. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're a story," he said, the words as smooth and cold as the marble desk between them. "A comeback, an inspiration. The world wants to see that. We want to sell that." He slid a contract across the table, the paper a crisp, clean white, starkly different from the grimy, sweat-stained gloves Desmond had trained with. The offer was a full-ride sponsorship, professional trainers, top-of-the-line equipment, and a move to a state-of-the-art gym in the affluent suburbs. The condition, stated with a chilling politeness, was that Desmond must, quote, "focus on his brand." It was a request to cut ties, to leave the old garage and Marcus behind. "It's the path to the top," Mr. Harrison said, his voice a low hum of conviction. It wasn't an offer of help. It was a new form of systemic exclusion, a more subtle, more insidious attempt to co-opt his story, to separate him from the roots that had given him his strength. The air in the room felt thin, suffocatingly sterile. The lure was powerful, a chance to escape the endless struggle, to finally have the resources that had always been denied to him. But the price was his identity. The second temptation arrived in the form of Elias, his longtime friend, a man whose rage at the system was a perpetual low-grade fever. Elias pulled up outside the garage, the bass from his car vibrating the cracked asphalt. He gestured to a stack of crisp bills on the passenger seat, the money of visual, undeniable weight. "Look, D," Elias said, his voice a mix of desperation and triumph. "This is real money. Dirty money, sure, but it's enough. We can pay off the developer, we can save the gym, we can save all of us." The temptation was immense. It was the shortcut, the violent, fast solution to a problem that had taken years to build. Desmond felt the heat from the engine, the lure of an immediate fix. The frustration that had fueled his training now felt like a dangerous, volatile thing that could be put to a different, more destructive purpose. The money, a product of the very world that had always told them they were worthless, was a kind of dark mirror to his own desire to win. It promised the same outcome, saving the gym, but on different terms. Terms that involved a betrayal of his moral code,
a descent into the very darkness he had fought so hard to escape. The pressure mounted, a heavy weight on his shoulders. He felt trapped between two worlds, the clean corporate co-option of Mr. Harrison and the desperate, morally ambiguous shortcut of Elias. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The taste of victory had turned to ash in his mouth. He found himself walking through his neighborhood, the familiar sights and sounds a comfort, a grounding force. He saw the tired faces of his neighbors, the kids playing basketball on a court with a broken backboard, the mothers pushing strollers down the broken sidewalks. He saw his sister, Aisha, sitting on their front stoop, a book in her hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. He sat beside her, the air thick with unspoken worries. Aisha closed her book and looked at him, her eyes wide and clear. "You're not what they want you to be, Dee," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You're what you are to us." Her words were a sudden, stunning clarity. She wasn't talking about the money or the fame. She was talking about his soul. He had trained not to be a product, not to be a gangster, but to be an example, to show that their worth wasn't defined by the limits the system had placed on them. He saw the truth in her simple words. The money from the businessman and the money from Elias were the same thing. They were both a demand to sell his soul, a price he was unwilling to pay. He had fought so hard for his dignity, and to throw it away for a fleeting victory would be the ultimate defeat. His vengeance was not about getting rich. It was about protecting his community's dignity, a quiet, powerful act of resistance. His sister had reminded him of the true nature of his fight. With a new sense of purpose, he rose from the stoop. His mind was made up. He had found his strength in a forgotten garage, and he would not abandon it for a life that was a lie. His path forward was clear, and it was a path he would walk on his own terms. His fight wasn't over. It had just begun.
Aisha's simple words had been a key turning in a rusted lock, a sudden, blinding clarity in the suffocating haze of temptation. Desmond stood on the stoop, the quiet hum of his neighborhood a balm to his frazzled nerves. He saw the world not through the lens of a prizefighter, but as a boy from Detroit, a son, a brother, a student of a man who had fought battles far beyond the ring. He had trained in a garage where every scrape and scuff on the floor was a testament to endurance, not a place to be cast aside for a glossy, soulless gym in the suburbs. The offers, from the clean-cut marketer and the desperate friend, were two sides of the same counterfeit coin. They both demanded he abandon the very thing that made his story powerful, his roots. His victory was never meant to be a ticket out, but a tool to bring his community's struggle to the light. The true win was not in a title or a contract, but in the choice to remain. His fight, he realized, was for the dignity of his people, not for his own escape. His vengeance was not a personal revenge, but a collective one, a rejection of the narrative of despair that the system had tried to write for them all. With a newfound purpose, he walked to the garage. Marcus was waiting, the eviction notice a crumpled ball in his hand. Desmond took a deep breath, the air smelling of old oil and hope. He spoke not of championships or fame, but of platforms, of legacy, of a new kind of fight. He told Marcus that the viral video wasn't just a clip, it was their voice, and they were going to use it. The fight wasn't in the ring, it was on the front lines of their community. Desmond began to organize. He leveraged the video's reach to share the story of the gym's impending eviction. He didn't ask for money directly, but for people to share their own stories of systemic barriers and triumphs. He became a conduit, amplifying the silent shouts of a community that had been silenced for too long. He started a crowdfunding page not with the goal of a handout, but as a challenge, a collective act of resistance. He called it the Silent Shout Fund, and the response was an outpouring of support from people who saw themselves in his struggle. The climax of this new fight wasn't in a ring, but in the polished, sterile halls of City Hall. The final hearing to decide the fate of Marcus's garage was packed. The developers' lawyers in their sharp suits spoke in cold, corporate language of zoning, revenue streams, and revitalization.
Desmond, wearing a simple hoodie and his worn training pants, stood up to speak. He didn't use jargon. He spoke of the smell of old rubber and sweat, of the sound of the worn punching bag, of the feel of the rusty garage door in his hands. He spoke of his sister's hope and his mother's sacrifice, and of Marcus's unwavering belief. He spoke not just for himself, but for Elias, for the boys who had found a home in that gym, for the community that had been systematically abandoned. He told them that the garage wasn't just a building. It was the heart of a community, a place of endogenous growth, a rare bastion of hope in a city that had lost so much. He told them that his viral victory was a testament to the power of that place, and to tear it down would be to declare that their struggle was meaningless. He was not a boxer speaking. He was a champion of change, an activist using his platform to dismantle systemic barriers, just like countless black athletes and fighters before him. The city council's vote was unanimous. The donations poured in not just to save the gym, but to build it up. The money from the fund far surpassed what was needed to fight the developer, enough not only to keep the gym, but to modernize it, to turn it into a true community center. Desmond refused the corporate sponsorship and he returned the money Elias had offered. His relationship with Elias remained strained, but there was new respect there, an understanding that Desmond had chosen a harder, more righteous path. The video's voiceover returns, a deep, reflective presence, its words now imbued with the weight of the story's conclusion. The victory isn't in a belt or a trophy, but in the quiet knowing that your fight, in your quiet corner of the world, echoes the struggles of millions. It echoes the defiance of William H. Carney, who took a flag and marched forward, even when shot, ensuring the colors of his people's freedom never touched the ground. It echoes the resilient dignity of Ezzard Charles, who became a champion in an era that tried to deny his greatness. It echoes the principled stand of Muhammad Ali and Colin Kaepernick, men who risked their careers to use their platform to demand justice for their people. The narrator's voice swells. The real fight is never just with an opponent in front of you. It's against the invisible forces that tell you that you don't have value, that your dreams don't matter, and that your struggle is a solo act. Desmond's victory was in knowing that his fight was never just his own. It was a legacy. And in that legacy, he found his voice, and in his voice, he found his power. The silent shout was heard. The final scene shows Desmond and Marcus in the now safe garage. The new equipment is a quiet promise of a brighter future, but the old, stained punching bag still hangs in its place of honor. Desmond runs his calloused hand over its worn canvas, a silent, reverent gesture. The bell on the door jingles and Aisha walks in, a wide, proud smile on her face. She doesn't say anything, but she doesn't have to. The silence is filled not with the sound of a punch, but with the palpable sensation of dignity, of home, of a true, quiet, and powerful victory.